I say to the honourable gentleman, give me this, I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I'll lord you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because what you're about to witness is the kind of moment even the BBC wouldn't dare script. Today, we step straight into Westminster, a place where logic occasionally takes a back seat and microphones tremble under the weight of pure political theatre. Yes, Prime Minister's questions, or as it's increasingly starting to feel, Britain's longest-running live comedy show. And today's headline act, Zara Sultana, an MP whose speeches don't just make a point, they arrive with attitude. At times, it feels less like a debate and more like she's competing in an Olympic sport. How far can you roll your eyes in a single sentence?
So, Mr. Speaker, can the Secretary of State explain how it was determined and who determined that Soldier F qualified for Ministry of Defence funding and what precedent this decision was based on, particularly given reports that he received double the financial support typically afforded to a single defendant? If he was eligible for legal aid, that avenue was open for him. Instead, £4.3 million of public money was spent defending a man who, in his own evidence to the Southern Inquiry, admitted his lethal role in the state-sanctioned murders on Bloody Sunday. Does the Secretary of State believe that this represents an equal and impartial application of justice, or a two-tiered system designed to shield the British state from accountability?
On the first point that she raises, it is right and proper that the Ministry of Defence provides support to any veteran who is facing a criminal justice process. I think we would expect nothing less.
Now picture it. The Commons chamber, green benches under the lights, MPs shifting in their seats like schoolchildren who've just been told off. And then Zara Sultana rises with the unmistakable air of someone about to expose a grand conspiracy, possibly involving defence policy and somehow the price of tea. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And immediately, you know, this is going to be one of those moments. The kind that makes half the chamber sigh, the other half lean forward, and the Speaker quietly consider early retirement. She begins firmly, indignantly, demanding to know how the Ministry of Defence justified funding for Soldier F. And you can feel it instantly. The tension shifts. Somewhere behind her, veterans sit a little straighter. A few MPs raise eyebrows. And somewhere in the building, an aide is probably Googling, "Can I still call in sick?" She presses on, voice tightening, confidence rising, delivering her argument with full moral force. If he was eligible for legal aid, that avenue was open to him. Then comes the number, fought on plows, £3 million, and the way she lands it, you'd think it was the price of an alien spacecraft. It works. Across the chamber, a ripple, groans, murmurs, that unmistakable British sound of disbelief. And just when you expect the moment to peak, she goes further, accusing the ministry of operating a two-tier system designed to shield the state from accountability. Bold, dramatic, pure Westminster theatre. You half expect the EastEnders theme to kick in, and then, perfectly timed, comes the reply. Hilary Benn, calm, measured, almost disarmingly so. He leans forward and says, "It is right and proper that the Ministry of Defence provides support to any veteran facing a criminal justice process. I think we would expect nothing less." That's it. No drama, no escalation, just a quiet, steady landing. Translation, sit down. That was always going to be the answer. Because let's be honest, this wasn't really about policy. It was about performance, about optics, about that moment when a clip hits social media, captioned, "Zara Sultana demolishes the government." Except, if you actually listen, nothing was demolished, except perhaps the mood when the boos began. Ah, yes, the booze, the unmistakable Westminster soundtrack, like a pantomime crowd greeting the villain. And in that moment, you can see it, a flicker, a pause, that brief expression that says, wait, you're not supposed to boo me. But this isn't social media. There's no mute button here. And that's the thing about these exchanges. They reveal far more about the theatre of Parliament than the reality of governance. Because nobody watching at home is suddenly studying legal funding protocols for veterans. They're watching it like an episode of The Office, waiting for the next awkward silence or the next perfectly timed reply. Sultana plays her role, earnest, passionate, relentless. Ben plays his calm, grounded, unshaken, and the rest, the live audience, occasionally heckling like extras who've forgotten which scene they're in, because only in Britain can a debate about national justice policy sound like an argument about who stole the biscuits. The tone, the interruptions, the polite sarcasm, it's absurd and yet beautifully bureaucratic. Now, beneath all of this, there is a serious issue. For some, Soldier F represents accountability. For others, particularly veterans, he represents something else entirely. A man caught in a legal process decades after conflict. And for the ministry, the principle is simple. If someone faces prosecution, they deserve representation. It's complex, it's emotional, and in that chamber, nuance doesn't survive long. By the end, the contrast is almost poetic. On one side, intensity, outrage, urgency. On the other, calm, measured certainty. A storm meeting a teacup. And the result, a moment that will be clipped, shared, argued over, and watched. Because in modern politics, attention is everything. Even being booed can be a kind of victory. So the next time you see a Commons clip going viral, remember this: it's not just politics, it's performance. Loud, absurd, deeply flawed, and somehow utterly irresistible. And what makes it even more fascinating is how predictable it all is. Because if you've watched Prime Minister's Questions more than twice, you already know the rhythm. The build-up, the accusation, the carefully loaded statistic, the moment designed for headlines. And then, almost inevitably, the reply that sounds as though it was written before the question was even asked. It's less a debate and more a choreography, each side stepping into position, delivering their lines and exiting just in time for the next act. You see, the real brilliance of Westminster is not in what's said, but in how consistently it's said. There's a pattern to it. The outraged question, the composed response, the rising noise, the theatrical pause, and somewhere in between all of that, the actual issue quietly slips out the back door, because the chamber isn't designed for resolution, it's designed for impact, for moments, for clips that can be sliced into 30 seconds and launched straight into the bloodstream of social media. And in that sense, Zara Sultana played her part perfectly. Every word measured for emphasis, every pause placed just long enough to land, every phrase carrying that unmistakable cadence of moral certainty. It's not accidental, it's performance refined over years of political survival. But here's where things get even more interesting, because the Commons chamber is no longer the final stage. It's just the rehearsal. The real performance happens afterwards. On Twitter, on YouTube, on every platform where clips are stripped of context and reassembled into narratives. Within minutes, that exchange you just watched exists in multiple realities. In one version, Sultana is fearless, holding power to account, exposing injustice, speaking truth in a hostile room. In another, she's overreaching, grandstanding, losing the room, misjudging the tone entirely. Same clip, same words, completely different stories. And that's the modern political battlefield. Not the chamber, but the edit. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. In politics today, being right isn't always the priority. Looking right is, sounding right, clipping well, trending quickly. And that's why moments like this matter. Not because they change policy overnight, but because they shape perception. Because millions of people won't watch the full exchange. They'll watch the highlight. And the highlight doesn't reward nuance. It rewards clarity, confidence, and just the right amount of confrontation. And that's exactly what you saw in that chamber. Two completely different approaches colliding. On one side, Sultana, high intensity, moral framing, a clear narrative of injustice. On the other, Ben, measured, procedural, grounded in institutional logic. Neither approach is accidental. Both are strategic. But when they meet, they don't resolve. They contrast. And that contrast is what creates the moment. Now step back for a second. Strip away the noise, the boos, the headlines, and what you're left with is something much simpler. Human beings under pressure. Sultana standing in front of a chamber that may or may not agree with her. Ben responding with the weight of experience, knowing exactly how these moments unfold. And behind them, rows of MPs, each carrying their own biases, their own loyalties, their own calculations about how this will look later. Because in that room, everyone is aware of one thing. The camera is always on. And once you understand that, everything else starts to make sense. The phrasing becomes sharper, the pauses become longer, the gestures become more deliberate, because they're not just speaking to the chamber, they're speaking through it, to the audience at home, to the voters, to the people who will see a 20-second clip and decide what they think happened. That's why the delivery matters so much. Not just what you say, but how it looks. And this is where the boos become important, because they're not just noise, they're a signal, a moment where the performance slips and reality pushes back. For a split second, the control shifts, and you can see it, that brief flicker, that awareness that the room isn't reacting the way you expected. It's subtle, but it changes everything. Because in politics, confidence is currency, and even a small dent in it can echo far beyond the chamber. Meanwhile, the audience at home is watching something entirely different, not policy, not legal frameworks, but personalities who sounded stronger, who looked more confident, who seemed in control. It's instinctive. You don't analyze it, you feel it. And that's why these moments spread, because they're easy to interpret. They don't require expertise, just a reaction. And once the clip is out there, the cycle begins. Debate turns into commentary. Commentary turns into reaction. Reaction turns into argument. And before long, the original moment is no longer the focus. It's the versions of it that people choose to believe. One clip, endless interpretations. So when you look back at that exchange, don't just focus on the question or the answer. Look at the structure, the setup, the delivery, the reaction, the aftermath. Because that's where the real story is, not in who won, but in how the moment was built and how it was received. Because in modern British politics, the chamber is just the stage, the performance is the product. And the audience, they're everywhere, watching, clipping, deciding, and waiting for the next moment to go viral.